Okay. We're interviewing Don Holthausen today, and the interviewer is Mike McGregor with the Grand Valley State University's Veterans Oral History Project. To begin with, Don, where and when were you born?
I was born in South Amboy, New Jersey, in April the 6th, 1949. And I lived in Sayreville, New Jersey, until I was 3. When I was 3 years old, my folks moved up to Bridgewater, New Jersey, a little bit northwest of Sayreville and South Amboy. I have a younger brother that's 3 years younger than I, and we grew up in Bridgewater until I turned 18, and at that point my folks moved again about 7 or 8 miles west. But I was in New Jersey, still live in New Jersey. I spent my whole life there.
Okay. What did your dad do?
My dad was an electrician for American Cyanamide Company, and my mom was a registered nurse. And although I don't remember her working full-time, a lot of times she would work part-time jobs, and she worked in nursing homes. But again, it was, you know, for a few months at a time, and then she would spend most of her time raising our kids and being a housewife and a mom.
Okay. And while you were in high school, what did you do? Did you take part in any activities?
No, pretty much general. I took general courses and mechanic, auto mechanics, and machine shop in high school. More industrial stuff, I guess.
Okay.
I was a machinist for Johnson & Johnson for 24 years after I got out of the Army.
Okay. In high school, as you were aging up towards 18, obviously Vietnam was in full swing. What did you know about the Vietnam conflict?
In my senior year in high school, I can remember a history teacher telling us about it, and also telling us about a couple of the 1965 graduating class and 66 graduating class, that some of his guys were already over in Vietnam. And I guess that's the first time I really became aware of the conflict.
Okay, you didn't follow it through the news or anything?
I would see it on the news from time to time, but I didn't really pay too much particular attention to it until I got my draft notice in 1969, early in 1969.
Okay, when did you graduate from high school?
1967, in June.
In 67 you
Yes,
graduated.
so I had a job. I was already in the workforce and had a pretty good job. And then in January...
What were you doing?
I was working as a machinist for Lockheed Electronics at the time. And I got my draft notice in January or February. And it was kind of a shock, because I know by 1969 the war was kind of winding down. I know the government didn't want to put a lot of more money. There was a lot of opposition about putting more money into it. In fact, I know Ripcord was like the last big battle over there. And even the newspapers didn't follow that too much for some reason or another.
Okay, so now you got your, now this is in the first part of 69, you get your draft notice.
Yeah.
When did you have to report for active duty?
June 2nd. June 2nd I reported.
Okay, so June of 1969 you reported where for your basic training?
Well, we went to the draft board, I believe, down in Newark, New Jersey, where we got on. We were sworn in there, and then got on buses and made the trip down to Fort Dix.
Okay, and describe your experience at Fort Dix.
Well, the first day down there, you get in line and you get all your hair shaved off, and you pack away your civilian clothes, and you're issued your Army uniforms, your combat boots and everything Army, and that's what you live in for the next 2 months.
Okay.
I believe it wasn't until our fourth week after our fourth or fifth week at Fort Dix, we got a weekend pass, and with a weekend pass, we were allowed to go home. I went home for the weekend to visit.
Okay.
It was only an hour ride.
Okay. What was your parents' reaction to your getting drafted?
I was the first one in my family to ever be in the military. I did have an uncle. that was permanent party down at Fort Dix. back in the 40s and the 50s. I believe he was a fire chief down there
Okay.
at Fort Dix, and he's the only one else that I know of that was even in the military from my family.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how would you describe basic training?
It was a very physical. We didn't have that kind of physical training since high school. But that's to get everybody in shape, and a lot of and out to the run, marches out to the rifle range and stuff, and getting familiar with rifles and everything else.
Had you done any shooting before you?
I did. Yes, I did. I was a hunter. I was a hunter before I got drafted, and I did some trap shooting and stuff, breaking clay targets.
So you were familiar with firearms?
Yeah, I
and
think
being
that's
out in the country.
yes,
things
yes,
like
and I
that?
think that's pretty much why that with all the aptitude tests they gave us in basic training, and I'm sure that's how I ended up with 11 Bravo MOS.
Yeah. Okay. So your basic training lasted how long?
2 months.
Okay, 2 months. At the end of basic training, then what happened?
At the end of basic training, I think we got a 1 week leave. And we had a report to Fort Lewis, Washington for AIT.
So your advanced individual training was in infantry.
Yes, at Fort Lewis.
Out of your basic training unit, how many guys got orders for infantry as opposed to others?
I'm guessing only 10 or 15%.
Really?
10 or 15%. There was a lot of MPs and a lot of cooks, a lot of mess hall cooks. In fact, I had my DI, the drill sergeant at Fort Dix. We joked around a lot, and he says, "Holthausen, you got 11 Bravo MOS because you never like to polish your boots."
Okay. Were your training cadre in basic training, were they Vietnam veterans?
Yes, just about. I think just about all of them. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And did they focus any of their training on that experience to help you?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, they told us what to look out for and what to expect. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And why certain things were, pay attention here
Right.
as opposed to.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Overall, how would you rate your basic training experience? Was it a positive?
I think yes. Yeah, I think it was pretty positive. After AI, right at the end of basic training, they asked the guys who wants to go to jump school, and I didn't. Even though I ended up in an airborne unit, I was never jump qualified. But out of our basic training company, 5 or 6 guys volunteered for jump school, and they spent the 2 weeks at jump school, and
even before their AIT?
even before AI.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it was before AIT.
Okay.
Again, I might not be 100% on that, but yeah, I remember a few of the guys volunteered for jump school
That's good.
at the end of training.
Now, in basic training, what weapon did you qualify with?
The M14.
Okay, you
The
still use the
M14.
M14.
Right, we didn't see M16s until we got to AIT.
Okay.
Yep.
So now did you have leave after basic before AIT?
About a week, yeah. I believe it was a week.
So you report to Fort Lewis, Washington. What time of year was this?
I got out to Fort Lewis. I got out of basic the end of July or the first week in August. Had a week off, so I got out to Fort Lewis, I believe, in about the middle of August.
Okay. And did you begin AIT right away, or did you have to?
Yeah, no, it began right away. Yeah, it began right away. And then 2 months out there, I guess it was like the end of August, September till the end of October. No, it was earlier in August. August, September till the beginning of October. Because after AIT I had 30 days leave. After AIT I had 30 days leave, and because it was in November. It was in November when I finally got a flight to Vietnam.
Okay, so what did your AIT consist of?
It was more infantry training. We got familiar with a lot more weapons. The M60 machine gun, law rockets, the M16. We fired the 50 caliber machine guns we got familiar with. We threw some more hand grenades. And then also escape and evasion courses, which ran for like about 20 hours. One of them ran all night long, and then we did another one during the day, daytime for about 15 hours.
What did those consist of?
They would give us a map and a compass and drop us off at point A, and you had to get to point B, which was about 12 or 15 miles away. And then in between they tried to catch you, tried to find you and catch you. In fact, they even had helicopters, even circling with helicopters. And if they saw us on the ground, they would run up with a balloon full of flour with flour inside and throw it at you. And if you had flour on your uniform, you were considered captured. And I believe it was myself and only a few others that actually made it up to the finish point. Yeah, they were able to capture most of the trainees.
How did you end up escaping, getting captured?
Just you know what, when we heard a helicopter, me and another guy just covered ourselves up with tree branches or whatever was available. And stayed out of focus of the helicopter. So we just kept reading the map and stayed in cover and behind a wood line or whatever, wherever we could.
Okay. Okay, so your AIT winds down. When did you know you were going to go to Vietnam?
I think it was, we got orders like the last week of AIT. We got orders the last week of AIT, I believe.
Now, did you get orders for a specific unit, or were you ordered?
No, they
Vietnam?
just told us to report McCord Air Force Base on such and such date.
Okay, so you went home for 30 days.
And flew out there, and we got back to Fort Washington, and they transported us over to McCord. Yeah, we had to report back to Fort Riley. I'm sorry, Fort Lewis, yeah.
Okay, and then the flight over. Do you remember anything about the flight over?
Not too much. It was kind of solemn, We knew we were all getting into something not very nice.
What was your family's reaction to your?
I guess they weren't very happy at all. I got a lot of letters from my parents, my brother, aunts and uncles, and they continuously kept telling me, "We're praying for you. We're praying for you." And you know what? Now in my old age, I'm getting maybe a little more spiritual, and I think maybe that's why I came back home.
A lot of power in that.
Yeah.
Okay, now were you engaged at the point where you went over?
Yes, I was.
And what was your fiance's reaction?
She wrote me every day. Every mail, every time we got mail in the field, I got letters from her. So that was really nice.
That's good. Every day. That's wonderful. So what was your first impression when you got? Now, where did you land? Did you go into the Saigon area, Benoit?
Cam Bay. We landed at Cam Bay, and I actually stayed down. They needed a guard duty down there. We actually stayed for 1 week down there and pulled guard duty on the bunker line at night. And then after being down there for a week, they said you were get your stuff together, or you're going to fly you up to Northern I Corps. You're joining the 101st Airborne, and that was the point where we found out where we were going.
Okay, did you say, how can I go to an airborne unit? I'm not jump qualified? Or?
Yeah, I thought about that, but I knew the 101st was air mobile over there, and very few of the guys had jump wings. They were.
When you first got off the plane, what was your reaction to the Vietnam environment?
We landed in Cam Bay. I believe it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So the whole town was kind of asleep. They loaded us in the back of a deuce and a half, 4 or 5 of us, and they drove us over to the reception center in Cam Bay, and we got bunks and stuff, and I think that's when they told us, you guys will be here for a while pulling guard duty.
Okay, so you did that for about a week,
Yeah.
and then you got orders to join the 101st.
Northern I Corps, yeah.
And then you went up to how did you get up to I Corps?
It was a small double engine piston plane. We got on that and flew up there.
Is it a C-123 or the smaller version of that?
I think
The Caribou, the C-119 or something like that they call it?
one of them. I'm really not
Yeah.
sure of the number.
How many of you were on the plane?
On the flight? I think maybe a half a dozen of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and where did you fly to then?
We flew into Da Nang.
Into Da Nang?
Yeah. Da Nang Airport, and then from there by truck. From there by truck, I believe, up to Camp Evans.
Okay, so all the way from Da Nang to,
Yeah. And
Camp
I'm not
Evans.
sure if all the guys went to Camp Evans. Maybe a few of them might have been dropped off at Camp Eagle, and then the rest of us went to Camp Evans.
Okay, so you got up to Camp Evans, then what happened with
I got signed in. I got signed into the company, and I didn't immediately go to the field. I think I pulled bunker duty there for a couple days, and then the guys were just getting ready to move from the DMZ to Firebase. It was Bastogne or Firebase Birmingham, and that's where I joined up with them. And by then it was, I believe, it was like the week right before Thanksgiving. I joined up with them on a Firebase. I think it was Birmingham. In fact, Bob Tarbuck or Steve Manth, I could verify that better.
Okay, and when you joined the unit, how were you received by that?
Well, the guys are all helpful and friendly, and you know, it takes a couple days to get to know everybody. And the more you get to know the guys, you know, the easier it becomes. You know, you learn the ropes. Several of the guys were more helpful than others. Maybe we just had more in common, you know. But it's, you know what, after you're with them for a few months, you're all like brothers. You all look out for one another.
Now, a lot of people, you know, have reported that, you know, when they first join the unit, they're kind of isolated and a little bit. Did you
Yeah,
find that?
because you're new, you're one of the cherries, you know. So they don't, you don't get a lot of trust until you work with the guys for a while and they see you can carry your weight.
Okay. Before you joined your unit, was there any special training that you went through at Camp Evans or anything for?
No, none.
Okay.
I think we zeroed our rifles. We got issued rifles, and you got to go to the rifle range and zero the rifle.
Okay.
That was about
That's
it.
what you did. So, okay, now you're with your unit on a Ford Firebase. And,
Yeah.
What did you do then? Was that
Which was pretty easy at the time because the unit just got back from the DMZ, I believe, before that, and we were on Firebase Birmingham and Bastogne, and I'm not 100% of the order. It might have been Bastogne first. It might have been Birmingham first, but now it was a monsoon season at that point. The first Firebase I was on at Thanksgiving time, the mud was 2 feet deep. I never saw so much mud in my life. You walked around, you were in two feet of mud sometimes. And that's from the trucks and the tracks coming in and out, just stirring everything up, and it was raining every day.
Okay, were you in the lowlands? Were these in the hills?
That was
or-
pretty much, Birmingham and Bastogne, I believe, were the lowlands, or right on the edge, right at the edge of the mountains, yeah, yep.
Did you spend, during the monsoon time, did you spend much time out in the field?
Yes. After Birmingham and Bastogne, we did go back out to the fields. And yes, you were soaking wet all day long. Then at nighttime, you crawled up in your poncho and poncho liner, and surprisingly, by morning, you were dry again. Your body heat and the poncho liner, and I guess the way the fatigues were made, they did dry out pretty fast. I was fortunate. I never got the jungle rot and stuff. A lot of the guys had problems with continuous sores and jungle rot. And I was fortunate. If I got a cut or a scratch or a scrape, I healed up pretty fast, where a lot of the guys didn't, from being wet all the time.
So now during the monsoons, you were operating around in the lower lands.
Yes, pretty much so. And again, I'm foggy on that.
Okay.
And I was telling Bob Wallace this morning, geez, they'd be better off talking to Steve or Tarbuck, because those guys, they remembered a lot more of it than I did.
Okay.
So some of this is still real foggy. I spent 20 or 30 years trying to forget all about Vietnam, and it wasn't until Steve Manthite contacted me 6 or 7 years ago, and Steve and Bob Tarbuck and I got together. They were the first guys I served with, and we kind of regrouped and started talking and stuff. And it's really pleasant because after all these years, you know, we think alike, and we all went through the same thing, and it's really great that we communicate again.
During this time, when you joined the company, who was your company commander?
Captain Hale was still company commander, and it wasn't until, I believe, right before Christmas time when Captain Vasquez took over.
Okay.
And Captain Vasquez, I wish he was here at the reunion this week. He did a lot for the unit, and he taught. Very good teacher. More than anybody in Vietnam, we got the best training from Captain Vasquez. And
What kind of training was that?
just that he made us do everything by the book. And in the beginning, a lot of the new guys were like, "Oh, this guy's really hardcore and mean and stuff," and that's not it at all. He wanted to teach us so we could protect ourselves. And I have to say that more than anybody, he probably saved a lot of lives over there from what he drilled into us and taught us.
Okay.
Yeah, we couldn't ask for a better commander than Captain Vasquez.
Okay, so you were in the area then the monsoons ended, and then what happened?
We were fortunate from November until April. We made no enemy contact, and I have to laugh because Bob Wallace keeps saying it was like a big walk in the woods, and actually the first 5.5 months it was a big walk in the woods. We would we'd be on the move all day and set up an NDP and at nighttime, and the next day move out to another location. And it wasn't until April until we made April, the monsoons ended, and we made enemy contact. And then we were pretty good for another month, I guess, or maybe a month or so. And it wasn't until we got near Firebase Ripcord we started making a lot of contact again, a lot of enemy contact.
Okay. Now what areas were this? You were in the lower lands. Now you were going back into the hills, or?
Yeah, we were in the hills in April. The first time we made contact, and Steve Stanley was killed in April. We were in the mountains at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I think the fact that the monsoons ended, and I think you had a big march of enemy coming back down the Ho Chi Minh Trail at that time, because the monsoons were over.
Did you get much advanced briefing on what became the Ripcord operation, or?
Just the fact that I think Charlie Company was the first one to go back up on the hill and to secure it. And I know our company and another company did make enemy contact the first time we went back up on the hill. But then I believe, and I might be wrong about this, but the first few weeks up on Ripcord, other than taking maybe an occasional mortar round or a rocket once in a while, things were pretty quiet. We were on the side of the hill pulling security for all the artillery batteries up top.
And what responsibility did you have to fortifying the fire base and?
We pulled. One of us were we were pulling security constantly, make sure nobody, especially at nighttime, make sure no sappers got through the wire. And in fact, like I say, this is all kind of foggy, and Bob Tarbuck was telling me this morning that we were up there for a couple weeks when we initially took the mountain again, and then we left, and I guess we worked around that area, and then we were back up on Ripcord again for more security for several weeks. And I believe that was all prior to 902. Mm-hmm. 902 was the toughest battle. We lost a lot of good guys.
Mm-hmm. And were you on 902?
Yes.
Now, Captain Vasquez wasn't your commander.
No, he turned it over to Captain Hewitt.
Okay.
I guess a couple weeks before that.
Okay.
It would have been very good if Captain Vasquez was there. We would have never spent the second night. I know the old timers, Steve Manthey and Bob Tarbuck, pleaded with Captain Hewitt and told him we can't stay here a second night. Something bad's going to happen. And it's just common sense. The enemy was down in the valley below us with a mortar tube, and they were mortaring Ripcord, and Ripcord was also taking rockets from the area, and we were firing. We fired when we seen a puff of smoke down in the valley from the mortar tube. We were firing a machine gun and war rockets and stuff down there several times during that day. And then later that evening, they said, we're staying here again tonight on 902, and we're like, what are you, nuts? You never stay in the same spot after making enemy contact. And Captain Hewitt says, oh, no, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. And the older guys pleaded with him and said, no, we got to move. And we didn't move. We stayed there.
Okay. Well, where were you on 902?
I was in the same foxhole. I was lucky. I ended up in the same foxhole with Steve Manthei. And when we got word that we were going to stay a second night on 902, Steve and I went back and we dug the foxhole about 2 feet deeper. Steve's a real tall guy. If you remember, he's 6'6", and at the time I was almost 6'2". We dug that foxhole about 5.5 foot deep, and by dumb luck, we were on the side of the hill where it was steepest. We weren't. It was like a ridge line. It was like and we were on the steepest side.
You had a big grade coming up.
Yes. So it was hard for any enemy to run up that side of the hill. So we were fortunate. We were in a. But once the enemy got into the perimeter, they were throwing satchel charges, and at one point, Steve reached down and threw something, and it was an explosion about 10 feet away from us. And I says, "What was that?" And he says, "I just threw a satchel. The satchel charge came in a hole." He says, "I threw it." Yeah. He picked up a satchel charge and threw it back out. And I believe Steve got some shrapnel, not shrapnel wounds, but I believe it was when that satchel charge exploded. I think Steve really got peppered with a lot of pebbles and dirt and rocks. Yeah.
Was he badly hurt or just superficially?
A lot of superficial stuff. And then what seemed like hours and hours, and it was probably only a half an hour or 45 minutes, after that things started to quiet down. And I was a radio operator at the time. And I says to Steve, I says, I think we have the only working radio. I haven't heard anybody on the frequency in the last half an hour, and since all this started. And I says, we gotta call somebody. So I keyed the mic and using our call sign, and somebody at Camp Evans, our command post at Camp Evans picked it up, and they said, what's going on? Ripcord told us 902 just lit up like the 4th of July. And I says, we have a lot of casualties, a lot of wounded, a lot of casualties. I says, could you get us a couple gunships out here as fast as you can? Get us gunships. And again, what seemed like hours, but was probably 20 minutes or 25 minutes, 2 Cobra gunships came out, and they're circling. They got on our frequency, and Steve, they said, how can we identify your position? So Steve and I fired a couple parachute flares.
Hand poppers.
Yeah, the hand poppers. Mm-hmm. We fired down the bank in front of us. And then Steve took the radio. At that point, Steve took the radio, and I kept watch. And Steve told the pilots where to fire. I believe first they fired between the flares, and then Steve told them north or south, whatever the direction was, they started doing perpendicular to the flares. And I was never so happy to see aerial support or any time over there. If you get in a firefight, once those gunships come out, that's the lifesaver. That's the lifesaver. Mm-hmm. The miniguns and the rockets.
How long did they stay on station?
They stayed on station. I think they pretty much used up. They pretty much used up all the stuff they brought with them. I think and I'm not. I think they probably each fired a dozen rockets, and they burned up their minigun ammo. And it wasn't shortly after that. It was probably 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. We could tell it was starting to get light out. But like I say, after the it lasted a half an hour or 45 minutes. The most of the confusion. And after that, when things started quieting down, we kind of suspected that the enemy had enough wounded of their own, and took off. And I'm sure Steve and Bob Tarbuck remember a lot more of this than I do. I spent 20 some years putting this out of my memory, you know.
Yeah. Okay. In immediate aftermath of that, what happened during the following day then?
We were extracted the next morning. The next morning, another company, and I don't remember which one, but I believe it was our sister company, came in, and they took over. And they said after we loaded up the wounded, that they said we were stone-faced. We just left and got on the choppers, and we were all pretty much in shock ourselves, you know, after taking a hit like that, losing so many friends.
Mhm. So then you went back to Evans, or where did you go back to, or don't you know?
I believe we went back. You know what? There I'm not sure either if it was Evans or Ripcord. So I know they had to regroup. At that point, they had to regroup. Our company was way below company strength at that point, and we did have to regroup, and we got a lot of new men after that. In fact, the guys at the reunion yesterday were telling that they merged. I don't remember this myself, but I think Bob Tarbuck said they actually merged Charlie Company and Delta Company. And again, I can't verify that. I don't remember that. But I know we got a lot of new guys came in the company because we were so under strength from that. You just interviewed John Fowler, and I didn't learn till yesterday that he was wounded 6 days before Hill 902.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and I just learned that yesterday, and I don't know if you interviewed Bob Womack, but anyway, I was talking to him yesterday. I didn't even remember him from Charlie Company, and he was telling me when he was wounded, and I'm like, son of a gun, I was like 4 or 5 guys behind you in line when you got wounded, and just after talking to him, it all started to come back.
Wow.
Maybe that's what's good about these reunions, you know, it's
Well, it helps you fill in some of the blank
Right,
spots
sure,
and
sure,
hopefully
sure.
put it in perspective.
Sure.
And,
it's a good thing that you're it's really a good thing that you're documenting this, because I believe in another 10 or 15 years, if you weren't doing this would all be lost.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, the project started for the World War II guys to get their stories on. And,
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
it's our generation's
Yeah,
turn.
yeah.
So you went back and refitted and reorganized and
Yes, and then we the guys were telling me yesterday, after 902 we had a big battle on Hill 1000. We took some casualties on Hill 1000, and I believe Captain Wilcox was in charge then. We assaulted the hill. The enemy was dug in pretty deep at the top. That they had the top of the hill was all stone, all big boulders and stuff, and they were dug in underneath that, because they said the hill was prepped before we went up the first time. I believe it was prepped with airstrikes and stuff. And but anyway, we took a lot of casualties. In fact, there was a young man that joined our company right before that, and he was a conscientious objector. And I tried talking to him. I says, put that all aside and take a rifle with you. And he's like, oh no, I won't do that. I'm a conscientious objector. So I believe he was one of the guys who got wounded up there. We ended up carrying all the wounded back down again. And it wasn't an hour later, somebody said you have to go assault the hill again. And I remember at that point, most of the guys said, no, call in for a napalm drop first. We're not going back up there. It's just suicide, you know, to run back up that hill again. So the sad part of the story is, I believe Captain Wilcox lost his command. They came out at that point and relieved him. He was relieved, and I believe we got another CO after that. Again, you know what? If I read that in Keith Nolan's book, I'd probably be more. I read Keith Nolan's book,
Okay.
but that was several years ago, you know, and I really have to dig it out. And before this interview, I should have reread it, but.
Jeff Wilcox has interviewed.
Oh, okay, and he lost his command after that, right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And basically ended his Army career, because he was West Point.
Oh my goodness.
the
Oh my
end of
goodness.
his career,
Yeah,
He
yeah.
lives in Western Michigan.
Oh wow.
So
That's sad, but honestly, I think some of the other guys were correct. I think if we went up that hill again without a napalm drop or something, we would just took a lot more casualties.
you probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Could be.
You know?
Very possible. Very possible.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, so some different kinds of decisions were made. And,
Right.
you know, who
Yeah.
knows why, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
I have to tell you, after I read Keith Nolan's book, one of the most upsetting things was that before we stayed the second night on Hill 902, Battalion headquarters was notified that we were going to be hit. And I'm not sure who, if it's G1 or G4, whoever does the security, but I know they eavesdrop on the Vietnamese radio frequencies, and they had good word. They from a reliable source. They heard in Vietnamese that we were going to be hit that night, and yet that information never came down from Battalion headquarters to our company. So you know what? If they communicated that down to us, I feel we definitely would have stayed on that hill a second night.
Right. Yeah.
And I would that was the most upsetting thing about reading Keith Nolan's book. I just learned that about 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay. So then, following your narrative, okay, you had 902, then on Hill 1000.
1000.
And what happened after Hill 1000?
It's kind of foggy. I only spent, after Hill 1000, I believe I was only out in the field maybe a month top, maybe a month after that. And at that point, I was called into the rear area, back to Camp Evans, and I pulled bunker duty at Camp Evans for about 2 or 3 weeks. This had to been the end of September, beginning of October. I pulled bunker duty at Camp Evans, and I wasn't expecting to go home until November. And then one day at the end of October, the Jeep came out to the bunker line one morning and says, "Come on, you got to come back to the rear area and pack your stuff. You're going home." And what it was, I actually got a 14-day drop, 14-day early out. So I spent total 50 weeks in Vietnam.
Okay, and do you remember the trip home? Do you remember that? Where did
Oh,
you
we all
go?
celebrated. We all celebrated, and it was a Southwest. It was either Southwest or Frontier Airlines, but the flight home. Everybody was so happy just to be going home.
Where did you fly out of? Can you remember?
I think Da Nang. I'm pretty sure it was Da Nang. We flew out of Da Nang. By 1970, Da Nang was a pretty good town. I can tell you towns in New Jersey are worse now than Da Nang was in 1970. Yeah, I flew out of Da Nang. The flight home was, everybody was so happy, just happy to be on their way home. And I think we stopped to refuel. We stopped to refuel in Guam. And some of the guys even went into PX, and we bought bottles and stuff, and we were drinking on the plane. And even the stewardesses were joking around. They were happy for us that we were coming home.
Okay, and
It was a good.
Where did you land in the States then?
Back at McCord. Well, our flight came into McCord at about 12:30 in the morning, and we were like, "Okay, let's get me to the bus station. I want to go home. I want to get headed back to New Jersey." And they were like, "No, you got to come down and have a steak dinner first." And who the heck feels like eating a steak dinner at 12:30 in the morning? 1 o'clock in the morning. Who wants to eat a steak dinner? But we all filed into the restaurant, and they had a nice steak cooked any way you want it, a nice steak prepared the way you asked for it. And then from there we went and we got out of our jungle fatigues, and they gave us a new set of Class A's. And then from there we got on a bus, and the bus took us back to Seattle to get to the airport. But that was 12:30 in the morning. That was 12:30 in the morning we arrived, and it wasn't until 10 or 11 o'clock the next morning we finally got to the airport in Seattle. And quite honestly, I would have just take me to the airport. I want to head back to New Jersey. But it was great to be home. Great to be home and see everybody again.
So you got home and
Oh, it was great. Yeah.
now you're still in the Army though, right?
Still in the Army. Yeah. I got orders. They gave us orders. I believe when we landed in McCord, they gave us orders, and I was home. I was home for I think 14 days, and then I had a report. I had a report to Fort Riley, Kansas, and another fellow from Charlie Company, Jim Billingsley. Jim Billingsley and I stayed in touch for a number of years, and unfortunately he passed away in the late 80s or early 90s. And but anyway, he got orders. I ran into him I got to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I bumped into Jim, and I says, Jim, what are you doing here? And he told me what company he was. He was in the battalion only a block away from us, and his wife was already living out there. And he says, Don, he says, why don't you go back home? He says, there's an apartment in town right by us. Why don't you go back home, fly back home and get Linda and come back out here and get an apartment by us in town? And I did that. I had 5 days leave left, and I went back home, flew back home and got Linda, and she drove out with me, and we got an apartment. And actually, it wasn't that bad out in Fort Riley. We had to make 7 o'clock formation in the morning, and then if we didn't have guard duty at 5 o'clock in the evening, we just went back home again. It was, it was like an 8-hour-a-day job.
So, when you first came home from Vietnam, then did you get married?
Yes.
Okay.
I was home 2 weeks and got married.
Okay.
Yes.
So
yep.
on your 30-day leave or whatever it was when you got back?
Got married. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I was home 30 days. Got married. Yeah, because we even took a week honeymoon.
So then you went back to Fort Riley with your wife? And
Yeah. I actually flew out there by myself, and that's when I bumped into Jim Billingsley, and he's like, Don, why don't you bring Linda out here with you? And I'm like, I never thought about it. I never thought I could do that. And he goes, oh yeah, you can get housing off post. And so that's what I did. And Jim and I became very good friends after that. On weekends, Linda and I and him and his wife, and he had a little daughter at the time, but we would go out to dinner and stuff. Or if nothing else, Jim's wife Carol and Linda would make pizza. At our place, at their place, they would make homemade pizza and stuff. And yeah, it wasn't a bad stateside duty at all.
so how long did you stay at Fort Riley?
Six months, and I ETS'd from there.
And then
Yeah.
you were done with the service?
I was
and,
done with the service. Just wanted to go home.
And
I made my last 6 or 8 weeks there. I went before the NCO review board, and they gave me that's when they made me a sergeant, E5, a buck sergeant, and I must have had a half a dozen re-up talks after that. They wanted me to re-enlist for another 6 years, and I just wanted to get back home by my family, and
wanted to get on with your life?
that's
and,
it. Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for interviewing. It was a
Thank you.
fascinating story.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for everything that you've done.
And I'll tell honestly, if you talk to Bob Tarbuck or Steve Manthey, they could verify some of those facts a little bit better. Like I say, some of it's still foggy, but it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, I think I gotta shut this off.